A military helicopter is a helicopter that is either specifically built or converted for use by military forces. A military helicopter's mission is a function of its design or conversion. The most common use of military helicopters is transport of troops, but transport helicopters can be modified or converted to perform other missions such as combat search and rescue, medical evacuation, airborne command post, or even armed with weapons for attacking ground targets. Specialized military helicopters are intended to conduct specific missions. Examples of specialized military helicopters are attack helicopters, observation helicopters, and anti-submarine warfare helicopters. Types and roles. Military helicopters play an integral part in the sea, land and air operations of modern militaries. Generally, manufacturers will develop airframes in different weight, size classes which can be adapted to different roles through the installation of mission-specific equipment. To minimize development costs, the basic airframes can be stretched and shortened, be updated with new engines and electronics, and have the entire mechanical and flight systems mated to new fuselages to create new aircraft. For example, the UH-1 has given rise to a number of derivatives through stretching and re-engineering, including the R-1. Modern helicopters have introduced modular systems which allow the same airframe to be configured for different roles. For example, the A-101 in Royal Navy service can be rapidly configured for ASW or transport missions in hours. To at the same time retain flexibility and limit costs, it is possible to fit an airframe for but not with a system. For example, in the U.S. Army's AH-64D variants are all fitted to be able to take the longbow radar system, but not enough sets have been brought to equip the whole force. The systems can be fitted to only those airframes that need it, or when finances allow the purchase of enough units. Equipment. Most military helicopters are armored to some extent, however all equipment is limited to the installed power and lift capability and the limits. Installed equipment places on useful payload. The most extensive armor is placed around the pilots, engines, transmission and fuel tanks. Fuel lines, control cables and power to the tail rotor may also be shrouded by Kevlar armor. The most heavily armored helicopters are attack, assault and special forces helicopters. In transport helicopters, the crew compartment may or may not be fully armored, a compromise being to give the passengers Kevlar-lined seats but to leave the compartment for the most part unarmored. Survivability is enhanced by redundancy and the placement of components to protect each other. For example, the Black Hawk family of helicopters uses two engines and can continue to fly on only one. The engines are separated by the transmission and placed so that if attacked from any one flank, the engine on that flank acts to protect the transmission and the engine on the other side from damage. Aviation electronics, or avionics, such as communication radios and navigation aids are common on most military helicopters. Specialized avionics, such as electronic countermeasures and identification friend-or-foe systems, are military-specific systems that can also be installed on military helicopters. Other payload emission systems are installed either permanently or temporarily, based on specific mission requirements. Optical and IR cameras for scout helicopters, dunking sonar and search radar for anti-submarine helicopters, extra radio transceivers and computers for helicopters used as airborne command posts. Armor, fire suppression, dynamic and electronics systems enhancements are invisible to casual inspection. As a cost-cutting measure, some nations and services have been tempted to use what are essentially commercial helicopters for military purposes. For example, it has been reported that the PRC is carrying out a rapid enlargement of its assault helicopter regiments with a civilian version of the MiL. Mi-17 These helicopters without armor and electronic countermeasures will function well enough for training exercises and photo opportunities, but would be suicidal to deploy in the assault role in actual combat situations. The intention of China appears to be to retrofit these helicopters with locally produced electronics and armor when possible, freeing available funds to allow rapid creation of enough regiments to equip each of its group armies, allowing a widespread build-up of experience in helicopter operations. Attack helicopters are helicopters used in the anti-tank and close air support roles. The first of the modern attack helicopters was the Vietnam-era AW-1 Cobra, which pioneered the now classic format of pilot and weapons officer seated in tandem in a narrow fuselage, chin-mounted guns, and rockets and missiles mounted on stub wings, to enable them to find and identify the targets. Some modern attack helicopters are equipped with very capable sensors such as a millimeter-wave radar system. Attack helicopters. Transport helicopters are used for transporting personnel and cargo in support of military operations. In larger militaries, these helicopters are often purpose-built for military operations, but commercially available aircraft are also used. The benefit of using helicopters for these operations is that personnel and cargo can be moved to and from locations without requiring a runway for takeoffs and landings. Cargo is carried either internally or externally by slung load, where the load is suspended from an attachment point underneath the aircraft. Personnel are primarily loaded and unloaded while the helicopter is on the ground. However, when the terrain restricts even helicopters from landing, personnel may also be picked up and dropped off using specialized devices, such as rescue hoists or special rope lines, while the aircraft hovers overhead. Air assault is a military strategy that relies heavily on the use of transport helicopters. An air assault involves a customized assault force that is assembled on the pickup zone and staged for sequential transport to a landing zone. The idea is to use the helicopters to transport and land a large number of troops and equipment in a relatively short amount of time, in order to assault and overwhelm an objective near the LZ. The advantage of air assault over an airborne assault is the ability of the helicopters to continually resupply the force during the operation, as well as to transport the personnel and equipment to the previous location, or follow in location if the mission dictates. Transport helicopters. Observation helicopters. The first reconnaissance and observation aircraft were balloons, followed by light airplanes, such as the Taylor Craft L-2 and Fieseler Fi-156. As the first military helicopters became available, their ability to both maneuver and to remain in one location made them ideal for reconnaissance. Initially, observation helicopters were limited to visual observation by the aircrew, and most helicopters featured rounded, well-glazed cockpits for maximum visibility. Over time, the human eye became supplemented by optical sensor systems. Today, these include low-light level television and forward-looking infrared cameras. Often, these are mounted in a stabilized mount along with multifunction lasers capable of acting as laser rangefinder and targeting designators for weapons systems. By nature of the mission, the observation helicopter's primary weapons are its sensor suite and communications equipment. Early observation helicopters were effective at calling for artillery fire and airstrikes. With modern sensor suites, they are also able to provide terminal guidance to ATGWs, laser-guided bombs and other missiles and munitions fired by other armed aircraft. Observation helicopters helicopters may also be armed with combinations of gun and rocket pods and sometimes anti-tank guided missiles or air-to-air missiles, but in smaller quantities than larger attack helicopters. Primarily, these weapons were intended for the counter-reconnaissance fight, to eliminate an enemy's reconnaissance assets, but they can also be used to provide limited direct fire support or close air support. Observation helicopters. Maritime helicopters. Among the first practical uses of helicopters when the R4 and R5 became available to US and UK forces was deployment from Navy cruisers and battleships, at first supplementing and later replacing catapult-launched observation aircraft. Another niche within the capability of the early helicopters was as plane guard, tasked with the recovery of pilots who had ditched near an aircraft carrier. As helicopter technology matured with increased payload and endurance, anti-submarine warfare was added to the helicopter's repertoire. Initially, helicopters operated as weapons delivery systems, attacking with air-launched torpedoes and depth charges based on information provided by its parent and other warships. In the 1960s, the development of the turboshaft engine and transistor technology changed the face of maritime helicopter aviation. The turboshaft engine allowed smaller helicopters, such as the Westland Wasp, to operate from smaller vessels than the reciprocating engine predecessors. The introduction of transistors allowed helicopters, such as the SH-3 Sea King, to be equipped with integral dunking sonar, radar and magnetic anomaly detection equipment. The result was an aircraft able to more quickly respond to submarine threats to the fleet without waiting for directions from fleet vessels. Today, maritime helicopters such as the SH-60 Seahawk and the Westland Lynx are designed to be operated from frigates, destroyers and similar-size vessels. The desire to carry and operate two helicopters from frigate and destroyer-sized vessels has affected the maximum size of the helicopters and the minimum size of the ships. Increasing miniaturization of electronics, better engines and modern weapons now allow even the modern, destroyer-based, multi-role helicopter to operate nearly autonomously in the ASW, anti-shipping, transport, SAR and reconnaissance roles. Medium and large-sized helicopters are operated from carriers and land bases. In the British, Spanish, and Italian navies, the larger helicopters formed the main anti-submarine strength of carrier air wings. When operating from shore bases, the helicopters are used as anti-submarine pickets to protect against hostile submarines loitering outside military ports and harbors, their endurance and payload providing advantages over smaller helicopters. Soviet maritime helicopters, operating from its cruisers, had the additional role of guidance of the cruisers' long-range anti-shipping missiles. Maritime helicopters are navalized aircraft for operation from ships. This includes enhanced protection against saltwater corrosion, protection against ingestion of water and provision for forced ditching at sea. Maritime helicopters. Multi-mission and rescue. As helicopters came into military service, they were quickly pressed into service for search and rescue and medical evacuation. During World War II, Flettner FL-282s were used in Germany for reconnaissance, and Sikorsky R-4s were used by the United States to rescue downed aircraft and injured personnel in remote areas of the China-Burma-India theater. From April 1944 until the war's end, the use of helicopters for rescue during combat increased during the Korean War and the Algerian War. In the Vietnam War, the USAF acquired Sikorsky S-61R and CH-53C Stallion helicopters for the CSAR mission. Multi-mission and rescue helicopters. training helicopters. Some services use a version of their operational helicopters, usually in the light class, for pilot training. For example, the British have used the aerospatial Gazelle both in operations and as a trainer. Some services also have an ab initio phase in training that uses very basic helicopters. The Mexican Navy has acquired a number of the commercially available Robinson R-22 and R-44 helicopters for this purpose. Tactics and operations. While not essential to combat operations, helicopters give a substantial advantage to their operators by being a force multiplier. To maximize their impact, helicopters are utilized in a combined arms approach. High-intensity warfare. High-intensity warfare is characterized by large arrays of conventional armed forces, including mass formations of tanks, with significant air defenses. Helicopter armament and tactics were changed to account for a less permissive flight environment. Anti-tank missiles, such as the SS-11 and the aerospatial SS-12 as-12 were developed and mounted on French military helicopters. In turn, the United States adapted its BGM-71-0 for firing from helicopters and eventually developed the AGM-114 Hellfire. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union adapted the 3M-11 Falaga missile for firing from the Mi-24. In the air, attack helicopters armed with anti-tank missiles, and one or more unarmed, or lightly armed scout helicopters operate in concert. The scout helicopter, flying at low level in a nap-of-the-earth approach, attempts to both locate the enemy armored columns and to map out approaches and ambush positions for the attack helicopters. Late model scout helicopters include laser designators to guide missiles fired from the attack helicopters. After finding a target, the scout helicopter can locate it and then direct the attack helicopter's missile where to fire. The attack helicopters have only to rise from cover briefly to fire the missiles before returning to a concealed location. Late development of attack helicopters, such as the Mi-28N, the Kamov Ka-52, and the AH-64D Longbow, incorporate sensors and command and control systems to relieve the requirement for scout helicopters. To enhance the combat endurance of these missile-armed helicopters, transport helicopters were used to carry technicians, reloads and fuel to forward locations. Establishing these forward arming and refuel points at pre-arranged locations and times allowed armed or attack helicopters to rearm and refuel, often with their engines running and the rotors still turning, and to quickly return to the front lines. Low-intensity warfare and counter-insurgency warfare. The government force establishes its presence in permanent or temporary military bases from which to mount patrols and convoys. The government forces seek to deter the insurgent forces from operating and to capture or kill those that do. The operation of forces from fixed bases linked by a fixed network of roads becomes a weakness. Emplaced insurgents and local sympathizers may observe such facilities covertly and gather intelligence on the schedules and routes of patrols and convoys. With this intelligence, the insurgents can time their operations to avoid the coin forces or plan ambushes to engage them, depending on their own tactical situation. Helicopters return a measure of surprise and tactical flexibility to the coin commander. Patrols need not start and end in the same place, nor do supply convoys need follow the same roads and highways. During the Rhodesian Bush War, the Rhodesian military developed and refined fire force tactics, using small flights of light helicopters. The helicopters would be equipped as gunships to directly attack insurgents with aerial gunfire and also as either an airborne command, observation, Post-to-troop transport. Once contact had been established against enemy guerrillas, paratroopers would be dropped by a Dakota and act as beaters to drive the guerrillas into stop groups landed by the helicopters. During the Troubles, the Provisional Irish Republican Army became adept at avoiding conventional fixed roadblocks and patrols. To prevent predictable patterns, the patrols were deployed by helicopter, known as Eagle patrols, and were then able to disrupt the IRA's ability to move personnel and arms. In the aftermath of the American invasion of Iraq, helicopters have been used as aerial supply trucks and troop transports to prevent exposure to ambushes set by the Iraqi insurgency. Due to the cost and complexity of training and support requirements, insurgent forces rarely have access to helicopters. Manufacturers. The major Western European helicopter manufacturers are now AgustaWestland and Eurocopter Group. In America, the three large remaining companies are Boeing, Bell Helicopter and Sikorsky Aircraft. In Japan, the three main manufacturers of helicopters are the aviation arms of the Japanese conglomerates Mitsubishi, Kawasaki and Fuji Heavy Industries. These companies initially followed a business model based on forming strategic partnerships with foreign, usually American, companies with the licensed production of those companies' products, whilst building up their own ability to design and manufacture helicopters through process of work share and technology transfer. In the Soviet-planned economic system, the Mil and Kamovo KBs were responsible only for the design of helicopters. A 2006 reorganization of the helicopter industry in Russia created a Boronprom, a holding company to bring together Mil and manufacturing plants.